Good day, beautiful people. This is Natalie Silva with Life Treasures and Golden Moments, sharing with you true stories of miracles and inspiration. Today, I'd like to share a couple of short stories with you on love. One is on family, and one is on eternal love. I hope you enjoy them. There is a land of the living, and a land of the dead, and the bridge is love. Written by Thornton Wilder. This story is about eternal love, and it's called The Angel's Gift. It was authored by Joan Wester Anderson. Gretchen and her husband Fred had a long and happy marriage, but Fred had recently died, and although Gretchen had a son and 4 grandchildren who loved her very much, one does not easily recover from such a momentous loss. During the first few months, Gretchen had been numb with grief and unable to weep, but she had progressed beyond the initial shock stage, and now it seemed crying was all she did. I was beginning to dread meeting anyone, she recalls, because I was so afraid that I would burst into tears in the middle of an ordinary conversation. People had been very kind, but Gretchen didn't want any pitying her, and she didn't want her sorrow to make others uncomfortable. On this Sunday, Gretchen went to church by herself and selected an empty pew. She saw no familiar faces, and she was relieved. At least if her anguish threatened to overwhelm her, she could slip out quietly. As she sat in the pew, she thought again of Fred, and the desolation and grief swept in waves across her spirit. I could hardly keep from crying out, she says. It was hard to endure such a continuous mourning. Would it ever end? In another moment, she was going to weep. Suddenly, a small boy entered the pew and sat next to Gretchen. She eyed him through her tears. He had light brown hair, was neatly dressed in a little brown suit, and appeared to be about 6 years old. And he was looking up at her in the most familiar way, smiling as if he knew her. It was peculiar. Children rarely attended church alone in this particular congregation, especially at such an early stage in this time of mourning. Where could his family be? Even stranger was the fact that, although the youngster had picked up the church prayer book to read, he kept edging toward Gretchen. He moved nearer and nearer, very casually. He would read, then look up, catch my eye and beam. His whole attitude made it clear that he had come to keep me company. What a darling child. As the little boy snuggled close to Gretchen, something else began to happen. She felt her heart lighten. Somehow, although she hadn't believed such a thing would ever happen again, she began to feel, yes, happy. It was only a fleeting emotion, like a brief little kiss, but she felt it, and she would be happy again. She knew it now, without question. A time to mourn and a time to dance. Gretchen was still very much in mourning, but the love and sweetness in the little boy's face had given her a glimpse of a better time yet to come. But who was this boy? Who was this child? Gretchen looked down at him, and again he smiled at her in that intimate and penetrating manner. She must know him. Why else would he be behaving this way? Of course, he was probably the son of a younger neighbor or friend who, aware of Gretchen's loss and seeing her sitting alone, had sent her little boy up to share the pew. Gretchen would have to thank his parents for their thoughtfulness. She would watch where the child went after the service. As the service ended, Gretchen and the boy left the pew and headed for the front door. There were people around, but not a huge crowd, and the child was right next to Gretchen. "What is your name?" she asked him. "Do I know your mother?" But instead of answering, he looked up at her for one last smile, and then as Gretchen's eyes scanned the crowd to find someone searching for him, the child vanished. He was there, then simply he wasn't. Gretchen didn't see him go, but when she glanced down, the spot next to her was vacant. I kept looking for him among the people until everyone had left, but I never saw him again, nor did I meet anyone who knew him or had sent him. But after that Sunday, Gretchen never felt quite so alone again. Gradually, the truth seemed to come upon her, that an ordinary child, no matter how charming, would not have been able to lift her spirits in the mysterious and welcome way. Instead, the child had been sent by someone who understood her suffering, and was reaching out to comfort and heal her. Perhaps it was Fred. What a beautiful story of everlasting love. This next story is called Tender Moments, and it was authored by Florence Jane Soman. Saturday morning, the moment she woke up, Kay thought of the new man she had met the night before and the coming telephone call. Her eyes opened instantly. An image of David Dixon sprang full-blown to her mind, his looks, his charm, and she smiled with sudden happiness. She had fallen in love, and she was going to hear from him today. Jumping up from the bed, she ran out to the landing and leaned over the railing. A long-legged pretty girl, 19 years old. "Mom," she yelled down, "I'm expecting a very important call. If it comes, I'll be in the shower." She waited. "Mom!" A distant "all right" came from the kitchen. A little later, dressed in jeans and a shirt, she entered the kitchen and kissed her mother on the cheek. There was a book under her arm. Her mother said, "How was the party last night?" "Oh, I had a fine time." The wildly inadequate statement made her feel guilty. She had heard often of mother-daughter relationships in which the two were like sisters, together, and they told each other everything, but neither of them could do that, although they loved each other deeply. Her mother had been raised in a strict household in which emotional restraint had been ingrained in her. "Your mother," Kate's father had once sighed, "plays things very close to the vest. When I first met her, I called her Miss Buttoned Up, and she hasn't changed much over the years." "Now," Kay said, "no breakfast to me. I'm going outside for some fresh air." In the backyard, Kay tried to read her novel, but an hour passed, rich with daydreams, interrupted only by frequent glances at her watch. Sitting there, it was as if her body had become one huge ear that strained like a bird dog for a sound that would not come. Why didn't it come, she fretted. It was late morning when her friend Emily arrived for a visit. Kay felt the pressure inside her easing as another chair was brought out and placed next to her own. "Guess what?" she said to her friend. "I think I'm in love." Her voice was rich with drama. "No," Emily cried out. "With who?" During the next few minutes, Emily listened to Kay pour out her disclosures. David's every expression was detailed. Every word he'd uttered was now reviewed for possible hidden meanings. There was a strong physical reaction between us. High-octane, spontaneous combustion. Suddenly she flopped back in her chair, overwhelmed by frustration. "What's the matter with him? If he was so attracted to me, why hasn't he called by now?" They gazed at each other, over pensively members of the same sisterhood. They talked a little longer, then Emily left. It was lunchtime. Kay could not eat. Her 15-year-old brother, Steve, had come home from batting practice, and now his student voice affected her nerves in a terrible way. Her eyes turned for relief to her mother, who was, as usual, eating quietly, her eyes lowered. Her mother had always held a fascinating strangeness for her. A loving woman, yes, but she kept her love deep inside herself, finding it difficult to reveal in word of gesture. Her father could grab his children in bear hugs, but she couldn't do anything like that. "It's not in my nature," she would explain, simply, if teased about it. Miss Buttoned Up, Kay thought now. Did she ever get Pop the eye when they met? The thought seemed preposterous, yet how had her parents gotten together? She excused herself and went into the backyard again. She felt, for the first time, a chill of foreboding. How could she be sure he would call? It was already mid-afternoon. Suddenly her mother emerged from the screen door and joined her. "Emily looks good," she said. "I saw her through the window this morning." She hesitated. "The two of you sure had a lot to talk about." Kay looked up swiftly and caught an expression that erased itself instantly from her mother's face. But what had it been? Jealousy? No, not jealousy, but wistfulness. That was it. Her mother wanted her daughter to talk to her as if she'd talk to her friend. Kay felt a sharp pang. For a moment, standing there, a dozen words pushed up in her throat. She wanted to say them to enclose her mother in her own world, but it was only for a moment. She said awkwardly, "Well, we hadn't seen each other for a long while." "Sure," her mother said. She straightened. "I'm going in town to do a little shopping. I'll see you later." After her mother left, she went inside. At the archway to the living room, she stood still, looking at the phone. Suddenly a hatred for it seized. It just seized her. "Ring," she thought, savagely. "Ring, you rotten black thing. Why don't you ring?" Her father came home early. Steve returned from a movie. Her mother appeared again. Suddenly the house was full, and Kay, to her horror, found them all congregated in the living room. Suppose David did call, she thought in anguish. With all of them right on top of the telephone, how could she laugh or maybe say something darling with them listening? Suddenly she could not bear it. She went upstairs and into her room, where she shut the door and fell down on the bed. Weak tears gathered under her closed eyelids. Whatever made me think he would call, she thought. I'm too vulnerable, too trusting about men. I must be on my guard from now on. Hearing her name called, she went into the dinette and found her mother sitting at the table looking down at what appeared to be an old snapshot. The lowering sun made a halo of light around her head. "Kay," she said, "look what I found this morning. I've been meaning to show you it all day." She handed the snapshot to her daughter. "Why, it's Pop," Kay said in surprise. How good-looking he was. She looked up at her mother. Something stilled inside her. A change had come over her mother. "Yes, he was," her mother said. "He was very handsome. I was just crazy about him." Kay did not move. The little statement, so incredulous, coming from someone else, stupefied her. She said foolishly, "Were you?" Her mother just crazy about someone? Saying it out loud. "Oh, Lord, yes." The words came hauntingly. "I loved him so much I couldn't see straight." Her hands were clasped tightly around together on the tabletop. "He lived with your Aunt May and Uncle Ed around the corner from our house. You know, one summer evenings like this I used to sit out at our porch and pray that he'd come by, because then he might ask me to walk with him." She looked down at her hand. "Sometimes he'd come 2 nights in a row, and sometimes he'd let a week go by. Oh, he gave me fits, I can tell you." She looked up slowly at Kay. "When he did come the steps and sit next to me on the glider, I'd be in clouds. But I suffered, too. I had this hang-up about my hips," her mother said. "I thought they were too big for the rest of me. So when he was there, I just used to grab a cushion and put them on my lap to hide my hips." Kay was shaken. Her mother was suddenly opening one of the little secret doors inside her mind and letting her daughter look inside. Her mother went on, "Girls in my college class had a saying then, 'Give him the ooh-la-la.'" She smiled wanly. "Oh, how I wanted to give your father the ooh-la-la, but I couldn't." She nodded. It wasn't my nature." Kay swallowed. "Well, you must have given out some signals. He married you." "I guess I did in my own way. Me and my big hips." They were silent, looking at each other. It came to Kay that her mother was waiting for something. Her eyes were big in her face. "Tell me," they were saying. "Now tell me. Things, too. I'm your friend like Emily, and I've known all along what you were going through." Her mother gazed down at the table, with her head bent over. The arch of her white neck looked thin and very young. "Mom," Kay blurted out, "I think I'm in love, the way you were with Pop." Her mother's head shot up. "No kidding," she said eagerly. "Who is he?" They began to talk. Her mother listened and asked all the right questions and said all the right words and sighed or exclaimed at all the right times. A richness seemed to slowly gather and swell in the air between them until they were both breathing with one breath, and in the breathing something warm and astonishing enfolded them together. It seemed to Kay that after the talk, a little lens had turned inside her head, and she was seeing everything through a different perspective. The telephone call no longer carried the urgency it had before. If it came, she thought, it would be wonderful. If it didn't, well, she wouldn't kill herself. Because of this new calmness, her appetite came roaring back. She ate her supper, ravenous, and gazed at her brother with a kinder eye. And when she helped her mother in the kitchen afterward, she said, "You know, I think keeping your emotions to yourself, like we do, kind of heats them up out of proportion." She frowned. "Actually, I don't know if I'm really in love. It could be just a sudden crush." "He bowled you over," her mother said. "Exactly. But that doesn't necessarily mean love." Now, the telephone rang inside. They both stood motionless, as statues looking at each other. Then Kay went inside in the living room and picked up the receiver. Her heart was suddenly pounding. "Hello," she said. "Hello," a young man's voice. "May I speak to Kay, please?" "This is Kay." "I thought it was. This is David Dixon. We met last night." "Oh, David, how are you?" "Fine." "Look, are you doing anything tonight?" "Not a thing." "Then suppose I pick you up in about a half hour." "Fine." She hung up the phone. For a few seconds she stood there, dazed. Then she went back into the kitchen where her mother stood, with her back to her at the sink. "Mom," Kay said. All the excitement was back. She could hardly speak. "That was my call. He's coming over in a little while." Her mother turned around. Her face shone. Suddenly she winked. "Give him the ooh la la." "Oh, you can depend on it." Kay burst out laughing. Her mother did too. Suddenly they were both laughing, helplessly together. Recovering, Kay said, "I better go up and change." "Kay?" Kay faced her mother. They looked at each other. Suddenly Kay knew what she had to do, what she wanted more than anything else to do. She walked back to her mother. Their arms went around each other, and they held each other tightly. Their eyes closed, their cheeks pressed together. "My mother," Kay thought, "my friend." Then, as if by secret code, they broke apart. Kay turned, went into the hall, and started bouncing up the stairs, taking them two at a time. There was a singing inside her head. I hope you enjoyed those two stories today. I hope you all have a wonderful week and a wonderful weekend, and stay well. And until next time, this is Natalie Silver with Life Treasures and Golden Moments. Take care, and God bless.